Today, we pick up Jesus at the beginning of his ministry. He's rounded up a band of disciples and has put together his ministry team. And I'm thinking this is about the time the disciples start to ask questions about this person that they've left everything to follow. Who is this guy really? Where exactly are we going? Where are we going to sleep tonight? And perhaps something more important or simpler, when's lunch? In preparing for this service, I came across this modern interpretation of today's gospel lesson, and I want to share it. It is summer, and the young preacher is taking the service while the regular minister is on vacation. Sounds somewhat appropriate. And folks are impressed. He speaks clearly and well and sprinkles his sermon with bits of humor. They like that, and they nod knowingly, thinking the young preacher will soon be one of the prestigious pulpits in the large cities. But they quickly forget all about that because a dirty, old, disheveled fellow in the back row begins yelling and screaming and starting a ruckus. "You can't fool us," he yells. "Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are. You are the Holy One of God." A few of the stronger men move towards the noisy stranger. They will do the appropriate thing. They will escort him gently into the hall, out of sight and sound, so the church service can go on. They will give him a sandwich and a cup of coffee while they decide on which of the social agencies in town could meet his needs. Except the young preacher doesn't let that happen. He strides down the aisle to the back of the church and crouches down in front of the young man from the streets. The man's hands are trembling. He's breathing deeply and hard. There's a firmness, gentleness, and passionate intensity in the way the young preacher holds the old man's hands, and the way he looks into the confused and tired eyes. The preacher has been well educated in one of the best theological schools. He's trained and includes a lot of psychology. So he knows what's going on and could easily use professional language to impress the bystanders. But instead, the preacher uses the language the man will understand. "Shh," the preacher whispers. Then he leans over, his face almost touching the skin of the man from the streets. "It's going to be okay. You got something bad down in your craw, and it needs to come out." Then a huge voice, the preacher shouts, "Evil spirit, stop hurting this man. Come out." The man breathes deeply. You can hear a pin drop in the church. "We're going to sing a song now," the preacher said to the old man very quietly. "Then we'll get some lunch. After that, we can sit down together over coffee and find out what else you need." As they stand around with their coffee cups after the service, the folks talk about only one thing: the way the preacher had handled a potentially embarrassing situation. None of them remembered a thing of what he said in his sermon. The young preacher stood off to one side. He stood shaking his head in sadness and wonder. What the people had missed most of all was that this dirty, disturbed, disheveled man from the streets was the only one who knew anything about the call, the urging of a loving, impatient one who has once said, "Go, you are the Holy One of God." Now, this paraphrasing of the gospel lesson got me thinking about other types of demonic powers or interruptions that could easily be identified in today's context. Many of the isms that we speak about, racism, sexism, ageism, classism, would easily fit. I would also contend that a stigma that surrounds those that are homeless or those with addiction issues would also fit. These are labels that are attached, and they are not nice ones either. We apply them to people sometimes without knowing what the story is behind the person. and I know because I have. When I was growing up, somewhere in my mid-teens, I thought my family was of a higher class than most others that I knew in my immediate circle. And I remember being pretty vocal about it. A certain youth group leader at the time called me on it. And probably didn't really sink in entirely until I found myself a few years later struggling financially. My family was on food stamps. We lived in an apartment that was partially rent subsidized. Recently, the paper ran a 4-part series on homelessness in the Seacoast area. The story struck a chord as one week they interviewed someone I knew. And I'll be honest, I'm still formulating how to respond, if at all. But even educating myself on the issue has helped. Homelessness is a growing issue, particularly here in Stratford County. One of the community individuals the paper interviewed had no idea that there was a homeless issue in the Seacoast. But she's now working out there on the front lines, raising awareness and helping students who may not have anywhere to go. There was a recent report by the Coalition to End Homelessness in New Hampshire that found there was a 44% increase of overall homelessness from 2015 to 2017. It is a complex issue. There's the tightening rental market. Rent vacancies are low, and what it costs to rent a place can be unreachable for some. People experiencing homelessness face a number of other challenges that further complicate their ability to maintain stable housing. Mental and physical health disorders, trauma histories, poor work experience, and low levels of education. A year or so back, I read a 4-part series in the New York Times entitled "When Whites Just Don't Get It." Nicholas Kristof had individuals write him asking when we could just stop talking about racial inequality and that it was simply time to move on. But we've seen stories recently about racism issues here, even in this area. One was about 2 children targeted by racism in the Oyster River school system. There's allegations of racial bullying on a school bus. The family had moved here from Kentucky to Durham, one of the more privileged areas around here. And it sometimes feels that we should be isolated from this issue of racism here in New Hampshire. But some of the reality is that New Hampshire is primarily a white population. We have to be vocal about what our desire to not perpetrate racism in our community. We have to make an effort to learn about existing policies and practices that negatively impact those around us. Those in our LGBTQ community may also feel those biases, those labels and stigmas negatively. When the Pulse nightclub shooting occurred in Orlando, Florida in June 12th of 2016, I and others had wondered how to respond. We worked with Wrong Brain here in Dover, held a vigil down in Henry Law Park. It was an outward sign to give those in our LGBTQ community a sense of peace. Consider a parent whose son or daughter comes out. How do they react? Is it with love? We have to continue working for justice and not just sweep the issues under the rug. The gospel reading describes how the people were amazed at Jesus' teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as teachers of the law. What was so amazing, so new, so authoritative about Jesus? Jesus brought healing, wholeness in all that he said and did. He drove out evil spirits. He embraced everyone and excluded no one. We rarely will get in trouble because we overdo our sense of justice and fairness. Every day, we get a chance to become better versions of ourselves, to become better disciples of Jesus. And yet, in the moments when we think no one is looking, when the stakes are high, we can forget. It is worth remembering that justice isn't only offered on behalf of others. Offering people the chance to be treated the way we'd like to be treated benefits us too. It goes around. We as United Methodists are sent out into the world to engage in the struggle for justice and reconciliation. Even our baptismal vows mention how we should resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves. The United Methodist Church also has a social creed, which covers a wide variety of social issues and where we commit to the rights of others. And if you're not familiar with it, I have included it into the bulletin, and I would encourage you to read it at some point. We are to act in ways that bring healing and hope. There's no escaping our responsibility. None of us are exempt, no matter how our political bent is, or our social setting, or church setting. Whether you're left wing, right wing, middle wing, or no wings at all. No matter that we feel helpless or not. Not knowing what to say or do is a shared experience from pulpit to pew to the parking lot. It frankly can be uncomfortable, and that is okay. But we have to spread the word just like those who spread the news after Jesus preached. We have to refuse to just stand and watch. We need to pray, listen, learn, and then work for that justice, giving a voice to those who may not have one otherwise. Amen.